In post-Soviet Armenia, the problems of Soviet history began to be discussed rather late. This is usually explained by the fact that this place of public memory was occupied by discussions about the unrecognized Armenian genocide in Turkey in 1915-1923. There are many works supposing that genocide led to the formation of collective trauma and can develop into a master narrative that defines the language of description for any other trauma. German historian Van Duner pointed out that it is precisely ethnicized memory that could be passed down from generation to generation and in fact work as a cultural trauma. Here I am following the terminology of Ron Ehrman, who distinguishes the cultural former collective trauma. But before the memory of the Armenian genocide became a master narrative, it went through a latent period of resistance to oblivion. In addition to the mass protests in 1965 in Yerevan, in which more than 50,000 people participated, attempts were made earlier to voice the genocide at the level of individual initiatives. For example, on the gravestones of genocide survivors who died in Soviet Armenia, not only the year of birth and death of deceased was indicated as usually, but also the place of birth, the name of the settlement in Turkey from where the deceased was forced to emigrate. Thus, the tombstone was supposed to act as evidence of the displacement of residents from Western Armenia and the deprivation of their homeland. We recorded a similar practice among the Armenians deported to Siberia in 1949, who, after their rehabilitation and return to Armenia, began to transport the ashes of their relatives who died in Siberia to their homeland. On the gravestones of these people, next to the year of death, an inscription appeared about the place of death, the first burial, and the year of reburial. Various tragedies were usually compared with genocide, presenting Armenians inclusively as victims and enemies in the fashion of terms were taken out of the ethnic borders. However, sometimes the ethnic line between victims and executioners blurs, and victims and executioners are placed within ethnic boundaries. A good example was the attempt to erect a monument to Anastas Mikoyan in one of the central parks of Yerevan in 2014. Mikoyan, as one of the rare long livers of the Soviet nomenclatura, about him they joked from Ilich to Ilich without a heart attack and paralysis, turned out to be a very convenient occasion for discussions on the Soviet past, since he managed to become a participant in many important historical events. It got the point that the street that had been named after him quietly a few years earlier became the subject of a performance by one of the civic activists. He renamed the street in honor of Enver Pasha, the Minister of War of the Young Turk government and one of the main accused of planning and carrying out the Armenian genocide. Other demotivators that appeared on Facebook compared him with Taliat, another genocide architect. Thus, Mikoyan was equated with the main persons accused of the Armenian genocide. The aggravated reaction to the planned monument was apparently related to the fact that 6 months earlier, Armenia was forced to join the custom union with Russia, and this monument was also perceived as a symbolic act of neo-colonization. In dialogue with the authorities, representatives of the movement against the monument had to appeal to the fact of Mikoyan's biography, which could be interpreted as crimes of varying degrees, from national, more often through stories related to genocide, to indifference to repressed friends and relatives. In folklore, plots are widespread where Mikoyan was accused not so much of atrocities as of inaction. In his native Loci region, the expression was widespread that Mikoyan did not even hammer a nail in Armenia to hang his own coat. The accusations of inaction also related to cases of repression of many prominent representatives of the Armenian intelligentsia or members of their families. Although, as historian Petros Shakayan shows in his recent research, Mikoyan raised the issue of the rehabilitation of Charents, an Armenian poet repressed in 1937. In 1954. This was the beginning of the process of reconsidering the attitude towards the victims of repressions long before Khrushchev's famous speech dethroning Stalin at the 20th Congress of Communist Party in 1956. The memorial initiatives of the descendants of the victims of repressions in the post-Soviet period indicate the attitude towards the so-called executioners is no longer so unambiguous. It must be said that the tradition of civil initiatives to erect monuments by the efforts of the community is a fairly widespread practice in Armenia. It gained its greatest scope during the Second World War, and the memorial that appeared in almost every village to those perished in the Second World War did not mean a formal monument to the unknown soldier, but were dedicated to specific victims from this settlement, whose names were indicated on the memorial. More than 600 such monuments have been recorded in Armenia, and the process of their installation continues to these days. Due to the fact that the relatives of these victims perceived this monument as a symbolic grave of relatives who did not return from the war. It is not surprising that some of these monuments turned out to be close to religious structures, churches, chapels, places of pilgrimage, especially those that were erected in the post-Soviet period. That is, these places of memory can be considered not so much in the terminology of P.Connerton as memorials, as a reminder of the past, but as loci of memory, which means topography with a certain form of behavior, rituals inscribed in everyday life, and so on. Unlike monument cenotaphs to those killed in the Second World War, where the state and local administration sponsored or encouraged their placement, monuments to the repressed are usually erected at the expense of the families of the repressed. Of course, there are still significantly fewer of them. What they have in common with the monument of the Second World War is that specific names are indicated here. This imposes a certain obligation on the maintenance of the monument on their relatives, descendants, who are considered the first addressees of this grief. So, the initiators of erecting the monuments to the repressed are their descendants. Even the memorial complex in Yerevan dedicated to the victim of Stalin purges was designed by the architect Jim Torosyan, who himself was the son of a repressed person. In rare cases, such an initiative comes from representatives of the local administration, as was the case, for example, in the village of Archaeology in the south of Armenia. And the decision of the chairman of this community to erect a monument in 2011 with the names of fellow villagers who were executed by shooting appeared under the influence of reading the book On This Side of Iron Curtain, published by local historian Grisha Sambatyan in 2009. The monument, named in memory of the innocently guilty, includes not only the names of the repressed, but a line from the same book, and do not say that the time is to blame and you are innocent. But the most notable part of this monument is the free space left after the name of the repressed in order to subsequently be able to write in the names of their victims who may be found in the future. This free space defined the new concept of the monument as an unfinished text, as an invitation to conversation, and where instead of a period there is an ellipsis. Another important point for local initiatives to establish a monument to the repressed is the choice of the site. In rare cases, the location is determined by the topography of the historical event. The difficulty is that the places of executions were not recorded anywhere, and it is impossible to restore them even from archival documents. There is some oral information that requires additional research. For example, many point out a place near Gyumri known as the Gorge of Massacres. This is the place where during the Armenian genocide the population of the nearest villages was massacred. But after 15 years it also became the place of executions and burials of victims of the Great Terror. However, it has not yet been possible to find out the last fact reliably. The first post-Soviet memorial stone in memory of the political victims of the Soviet regime in Armenia was erected in 1993, which was replaced in 2008 by a cross stone in the English Park of Armenia at a place where 21 arrested persons accused of organizing a uprising in 1921 were killed by the Bolsheviks with axes. For the initiators of the monument to the repressed in the village of Gocht, an important message was the lessons of history that need to be learned by descendants. Therefore, they chose a site near the school for the monument. It was important for the initiators that the monument does not have any religious connotation. Therefore, they did not make it on the form a cross stone, as in the case of the first monument, but wanted to emphasize that the monument has, first of all, a civil message, both for memory and oblivion. Forgetfulness here acts as a punishment. In the center of the monument, the names of the victims are indicated, and in the upper part, its purpose is carved in memory of the Gochtian repressed in 1937-38. As the authors explain, they deliberately chose such an inscription so that Stalin's name was not mentioned in it. For example, the option victims of Stalinist repressions was excluded precisely because it featured the name of the dictator, which in their opinion was unworthy to be immortalized. At the same time, among names on the monument was the name of the person who reported on the other victims marked on the same stone, and those, in turn, having conspired as retribution, named him as one of the associates. As a result, the informer was shot as well as those on whom he reported. Thus, the names of both the victims and the traitor, who in turn also became a victim, are recorded on the same monument. And as the initiators of the monument explained, the purpose of this monument is to raise the issue of guilt and place it on a system that forced people to denounce each other. And those who fell, both victims and executioners, were perceived as victims of the system on which they saw Stalin as the main architect. Therefore, unlike their local executioners, they deprived him of the right to memory. In Gyumri, the choice of a place in the church square was due to the fact that the monument is dedicated to the executed priest of this diocese. And in addition, the cross that fell from the dome on the church in one of the neighboring villages, Haikadors, served as a monument. The cross was badly damaged, according to the stories. In different times, the Bolsheviks fight at it on one side and Turkish soldiers on the other, because the church is located on the border between Armenia and Turkey. Being located in the center of the city, this monument at the same time became an object of worship as a religious artifact, to which believers treat as if it were a cross in a church. For tourists, the bullet holes left on the spherical base of the cross became a place for a tourist ritual of throwing coins. That is, here again the memorial acts as a memory locus, a space with certain urban practices of relationship with a monument, which does not become a detached memory sign. Grassroots initiatives to erect monuments often bring them together in a single memorial space, where monuments next to each other tell of collective trauma that did not become cultural trauma. In this sense, the monument erected in the Yezidi village of Shamiram is especially interesting. Here, 3 events with the name of specific victims are combined into one monument consisting of 3 columns. The first column is dedicated to the victims to the genocide, and the victims are listed by name, which is rare in the case of genocide. The second interesting detail is the date. Here, you can see 1915 and 1924, not 1923, is indicated. That is, not the dates from the textbooks were taken as the basis for the definition of a historical event, but the real dates of the deaths of fellow villagers. For the Yezidis, who also suffered during the genocide, if the starting date is taken from the public historical discourse about the genocide, then the end is determined by their local historical experience. On the second column, dedicated to the victim of Stalinist repressions, the date 1932 and 1938 is indicated. This is the period when the repressions affected specific people from this village. This emphasizes the absence of any historical canonization of the theme of repression. On the third column, dedicated to those killed during the Second World War, the date 1941-45 is indicated. Here, personal experience gives way to the historical canonization of events and dates that have been assimilated since the time of the Soviet school and dominate in public discourse until nowadays do not cause doubts or discrepancies. Coming to conclusion, let's highlight some of the features of the work of memorial memory using Armenian examples. In the presence of cultural trauma, in the Armenian case it is trauma or genocide, the practices of its memorialization serve as a model for other cases of collective trauma. If the cultural trauma is usually played out rather than worked through, according to Lacan, that means the boundary between victims and executioners is unshakable and serves to reproduce it, then in a collective trauma, memorial memory remains within the framework of individual groups and initiatives from below, and there is an opportunity to work it out. In this case, it is allowed first broadcasting different assessments about the same event, second rejection of master narratives and localization of memory, and third transition from the pathos of mourning to the revision of the relationship between victims and executioners. And the last point is monuments initiated from below can combine several functions and often serve not so much as a memorial, like reminder, but as a locus of memory, like a space of experience. That's all. Thank you.